session, we have seen about the female reproductive system. Okay, so in the female reproductive system, we have seen. So, sorry, yesterday we have seen about the male reproductive system, and today we will be seeing about the female reproductive system. So, we have seen a few parts of the female reproductive system, but I will repeat the same. Okay, so the female reproductive organs, it comprises of ovary, uterus, uterine tubes, and vagina. Apart from it, there is an important secondary sexual character, which is the mammary gland. So we will be studying about this as well. Okay, and the external genitalia. The mammary gland, it's an accessory gland of the female reproductive system. It is also present in males, but it is rudimentary. That is not developed. Okay, the mammary gland has got many lobules. Okay, many lobules. Okay, and these lobules are the ones which produces milk. Okay, so after pregnancy, so they will be, because of certain hormones, they will be producing it. The physiology, they will be talking in detail about the hormones. Okay, in your next semester. So this milk which is coming from the lobules, they come through the lactiferous duct. Okay, they come through the lactiferous ducts and they open into the nipple. Okay, the nipple is a slightly elevated area. Okay, and it is surrounded by a dark pigmented structure called areola. Okay, the blood supply of the mammary gland is by internal mammary and intercostal arteries and veins. Lymphatic drainage is into the axillary group of lymph nodes. So why we need to know the lymphatic drainage? Because in case of if there is a cancer, okay, so the lymphatic nodes needs to be removed. So in a case of breast cancer, you need to look for the involvement of the axillary lymph nodes, and if the cancer cells are found in the axillary lymph nodes, you need to remove them as well. Okay, or the cancer is gonna recur. So that's why we need to know the involvement of the lymphatic nodes, okay, and the importance of the lymphatic nodes. Okay, so here you can see these are the lobes, okay, and you can see the lactiferous ducts. Okay, the lactiferous ducts comes and opens into the nipple. Okay, all the lactiferous ducts, they come and open into the nipple. The nipple is a slightly elevated structure, and this is a surrounding darkly pigmented area which is called as areola. The blood supply, this is the internal mammary artery. Okay, and these are the intercostal arteries. Okay, this is the axillary group of lymph nodes. Okay, the axillary group of lymph nodes. All right, the next one, the ovaries. The ovary is just similar to the of testis, but it is present inside the female. Okay, inside the female abdomen. Okay, so it is the female gonad. Unlike like males, okay, in males, you know, the testis is kept outside the abdomen, outside the abdomen in scrotum. Okay, but ovary doesn't have any such special provision, so it is kept inside the abdomen because it doesn't require any special temperature. Okay, the eggs will start produce even in normal temperature. Okay, body temperature. So that's why it doesn't need any special environment for its function. So it is present inside the abdomen. It is located in the pelvis, the lateral wall of the pelvis, and is attached to the uterus by an ovarian ligament. And there is another ligament which is called as broad ligament, which is coming from the fallopian tube. Okay, and the ovary is attached to the broad ligament by meso-ovarian. Okay, by meso-ovarian. Okay, so ovarian ligament and meso-ovarian keep the ovary in its location. Okay, the ovary has got a large number of ovarian follicles. Okay, ovarian follicles means eggs. Okay, it contains a large amount of ovarian eggs. The arteries, veins, okay, are the same as that of testis. So here it is called as ovarian artery, which arises from the abdominal aorta, and there are ovarian veins, right and left ovarian veins. The right ovarian vein drains into the inferior vena cava, and the left ovarian vein drains into the left renal vein. Okay, so this is with regard to the ovary. So yesterday we have completed until this one. So the ovarian, the uterine tubes or the fallopian tubes. So this is a small tube which connects the ovary to the uterus. So the egg or the ovarian follicle which is released, it is transferred from the ovary to the uterus. Okay, uterus is the place where the zygote develops into a fetus, where the zygote develops into a fetus. Okay, so it is extending from the side of the uterus, okay, between the body and fundus. I will tell you what is the body and fundus of the uterus. Okay, it opens into the peritoneal cavity. It's not directly attached to the ovary. There is a small gap between the ovary and the uterine tubes. Okay, you can see that there is a small gap between the ovary and the fallopian tube. Okay, and when the egg is released, it is catched by this finger-like process. Okay, the finger-like process, which is called as fimbria. Okay, so they will push the egg towards the uterine tubes. Okay, and after this, it enters into the infundibulum. Infundibulum means funnel shape. It enters into the infundibulum, and then it goes into the slightly dilated portion, which is called as ampulla. Okay, slightly dilated portion, which is called as ampulla. Okay, now ampulla is the region where the fertilization takes place. So if a sperm is deposited in the female, it has to travel along the entire female genital tract. It has to travel in the uterus, okay, and then it has to reach the fallopian tube, and finally it has to meet the egg, okay, the ovarian follicle in the ampulla. So this is the place where the sperm and the ova, they get fertilized, okay, and then they turn into zygote. Okay, so you can see that the sperm has to travel a long distance to reach this site, okay, where the fertilization takes place. Okay, now the next one, any doubts until now? All right. So next one is the uterus. You able to listen to me? Yes. The next organ is the uterus. Okay, the uterus. The uterus is a pear-shaped organ and it is flat. Okay, so usually it is flat. Okay, when the person is non-pregnant, it is flat anteroposteriorly, and it is located between the urinary bladder and the rectum. Okay, so anteriorly it is the urinary bladder and posteriorly it is the rectum. Okay, and normally the uterus is anteverted and anteflexed. You can see the uterus is not straight, it is flexed anteriorly. Okay, you can see that it is flexed anteriorly. Okay, and this is called as anteversion and anteflexion. Okay, anteversion and anteflexion. Okay, that is, it is slightly falls towards the anterior side. So this is called the normal position, which is the anteverted and anteflexed. These are the normal parameters of the uterus, approximately 8 into 5 into 3 centimeters, and it weighs around 40 grams. Okay, that's the normal weight of the uterus. The uterus has got a fundus, body, and a cervix. So there are three parts of the uterus. The fundus. Okay, so here you can see the fundus, body, and cervix. Okay, so there are three parts of the uterus. All right. So the uterus is a pear-shaped structure located between the urinary bladder and the rectum. It is anteverted and anteflexed. Okay, and it has got fundus, body, and cervix. Okay. All right. The blood supply is by the uterine artery and uterine veins, which are rising from the internal iliac vessels. Okay. So internal iliac, you must have already known. So internal iliac artery is a branch from common iliac artery. Common iliac artery is a branch from abdominal aorta. Okay, you know that the abdominal aorta divides into two parts, which is common iliac, right and left common iliac. The right and left common iliac then divides into external iliac and internal iliac arteries, right? So the external iliac continues in the leg as femoral artery, whereas the internal iliac artery, okay, the internal iliac artery will supply the pelvic structures, and one of the branch from the internal iliac is the uterine artery. Okay, so you can see that the uterus is highly vascular. Okay, it's highly vascular. Okay, so there are a large number of blood vessels in the uterus. Okay, now the uterus has got its own coverings. The coverings of the uterus can be divided into three parts. The outermost part is called as perimetrium. The middle part is called as myometrium. And the inner part is called as endometrium. Okay, so perimetrium, myometrium, endometrium. Here also you can see the outermost part is the perimetrium. The middle muscular part is called as myometrium. And the innermost layer, it's called as endometrium. Okay, now the perimetrium, it's nothing but a peritoneal covering. Okay, the peritoneum, which covers the abdomen. So here you can see the blue colored line. So that's the peritoneum. Okay, and this peritoneum also covers the uterus. Okay, the outermost part of the uterus. Okay, so this outermost part of the uterus, along with the peritoneal covering, is referred to as perimetrium. Okay, now if you see here, there is a small space between the uterus and the urinary bladder. There is a small space between the uterus and the urinary bladder. Okay, so this space between the uterus and the urinary bladder is referred to as vesico-uterine pouch. Okay, vesico-uterine pouch. Vesico means urinary bladder, uterine means uterus. Okay, so vesico-uterine pouch. The other pouch, it's found between rectum and uterus. Okay, so this is called as recto-uterine pouch. Okay, recto-uterine pouch. Okay, this recto-uterine pouch is also referred to as okay, it's also called as pouch of Douglas. Please make a note of it. Okay, pouch of Douglas. Okay, so whenever I say something new, don't expect everything to be there in the PowerPoint. Okay, so try to take your notes also. So here you can see the recto-uterine pouch. The recto-uterine pouch is also called as pouch of Douglas. So the vesico-uterine pouch is between uterus and urinary bladder. Okay, the other one is the recto-uterine pouch, which is present between the rectum and the uterus. Okay, so that's the recto-uterine pouch. It's also called as the pouch of Douglas. The middle layer is called as the myometrium. As the name indicates, myo means muscle. So it's largely made up of muscles. What type of muscle? You already know there are three types of muscles, right? Skeletal. What's the other one? Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscles. Okay, so the muscle which is present here is smooth muscle. Okay, the smooth muscle is present in the uterus. Okay, So the skeletal muscles, it's attached to the bones. Okay, so that is the biceps, triceps, all those things are the skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is present in the heart. So here this muscle which is present in the uterus, okay, it is a smooth muscle, myometria. The innermost layer, okay, the innermost layer of the uterus is called as endometrium. Okay, it's referred to as endometrium. Endometrium is the innermost layer and it is further subdivided into two parts, which is the basal layer and functional layer. Okay, basal layer and functional layer. The basal layer is slightly deep and just superficially is the functional layer. Now, what are the functions of these two layers, basal layer and functional layer? Okay, you know that when each time the ovary is being, the ovary releases an egg. Okay, the ovary releases an egg. Okay, it has to come to the uterus. All right. Can you tell me like how long? Imagine like how long will it take the ovary, the egg to reach the uterus? How
3
long will?
days.
Yes, very good. 3 days. Okay, 72 hours. So it takes 3 days for the egg to come from such a close position. Okay, see, it appears to be very close, right? But it moves very slowly. Okay, the egg, it comes out from the fimbria, infundibulum, ampulla, interstitial part, and then it reaches the uterus. Okay, now why it is traveling so slowly? Okay, because it's just waiting for the sperm to get fertilized. Okay, it will go move on slowly and wait in the ampulla slowly. Okay, and in the ampulla, if the sperm reaches the egg at that particular time, okay, then the fertilization occurs. So during this time, what happens when the egg is released? The uterus is getting prepared. Okay, the uterus is getting prepared to receive the zygote. Okay, that is the fertilized egg. Okay, so that when the fertilized eggs comes here, it gets implanted into the uterus and it develops into a fetus or baby. Okay, so the uterus main function is to provide nourishment for the growing baby. Okay, the nourishment for the growing baby is provided by the uterus. Now what happens if the fertilization does not take place? Okay, if the fertilization does not take place, the egg comes. Okay, so there are no sperm. Okay, so then what happens? The egg comes down slowly. Okay, then it knows that there is a signal which is sent to the uterus. Okay, saying that the egg is not fertilized. Okay, and then what happens? The uterus will then start to shed its layer. Okay, it will shed its superficial layer, that is the functional layer. Okay, the functional layer of the endometrium is shed out, which is called as menstruation or periods. Okay, menstruation or the periods. Okay, so this occurs when there is no fertilization. Okay, so when the fertilization doesn't take place, okay, the innermost layer, okay, is shed out. Okay, it's shed out. It realizes that the egg is not fertilized. Okay, and then it is shed out. Okay, which layer is shed out? The functional layer is shed out. The basal layer remains the same. Okay, the functional layer, which is usually prepared, okay, to receive the fertilized egg. Okay, there is it realizes that there is no fertilization which has occurred, and as a result it will shed. Okay, and this process is called as menstruation. Any doubts?
No, doctor, please.
No,
Okay,
doctor.
all right, coming to the next one. Now in the uterus you can see that the uterus is here. This is the urinary bladder, this is the uterus, okay, and this is the rectum. Okay, now what happens if females they lift heavy weights? Okay, if they receive heavy weights, or when the pregnancy is there, okay, so the uterus can be more big, okay, because it carries the baby, and it can come out through this opening, which is the vagina. It can come out through the vagina, but it does not happen. Normally it does not happen, and females, they can also carry heavy weight. Okay, now how is this possible? Now where is the strength for the uterus, or how the uterus is held in its position? There are many ligaments which support the uterus, which hold the uterus in its position, preventing it to come down. Okay, so these are some of the ligaments. Okay, one is the broad ligament, which we have seen. Okay, it is present just below the uterine tubes. You can see this is the ovary, fallopian tube. Just below the fallopian tube, it's the broad ligament. Okay, the broad ligament. There is another ligament which is called as round ligament. The round ligament, it is coming from the uterus, and then it goes along the inguinal canal and gets attached to the labia majora. Okay, it gets attached to the labia majora. Okay, it goes through the inguinal canal. Okay, the round ligament. Okay, so these two ligaments, they are also called as false ligaments. False ligaments. That is, they are present, but they are not strong enough. Okay, they are strong enough, they are not strong enough to hold the uterus in its position. So that's why these are called as false ligament, broad ligament and round ligament. Okay, so now what are the true ligaments? Okay, what are the true ligaments? That is the ligaments which truly support the uterus. So these are the cardinal ligament. Okay, the cardinal ligament. Where is this cardinal? Cardinal means important. Okay, cardinal ligament. The cardinal ligament is present transverse on either side of the cervix. Okay, so here you can see cervix. Okay, so this is the fundus, body, and cervix. Okay, so if you take a section here, okay, on either side of the cervix, you will be able to see a ligament. This ligament, it's called as, what is it? Transverse cervical ligament. Transverse cervical ligament. Okay, or cardinal ligament. Both are same. Okay, transverse cervical ligament and cardinal ligament are one and the same. So this is one of the very important ligaments, one very important ligaments that prevents the uterus from coming out. Okay, the other ligament is attaching the sacrum. Okay, you know, this is the anterior and this is posterior. So there is a ligament which attaches the sacrum to the uterus. Okay, sacrum to the uterus, and this is called as uterosacral ligament. Okay, uterosacral ligament. There is another ligament which comes from pubic symphysis towards the cervical part of the uterus. So this is called as tubocervical ligament. Okay, tubocervical ligament. So these three are the true ligaments. Okay, so the true ligaments are cardinal ligament, uterosacral ligament, and tubocervical ligament. The false ligaments are the broad ligament and the round ligament. Any doubts? All right. The next,
Doctor.
yes.
No, thanks, doctor. Doctor,
Oh.
can you repeat the last point about the cervical ligament?
The pubocervical ligament, you can see here the pubocervical ligament. Okay, so here you can see it is coming from the pubic symphysis and it attaches towards the cervix. It turns around the cervix and it holds the cervix in its position. Okay, from the pubic cervix towards the from the pubic symphysis towards the cervix. Okay, so this is referred to as pubocervical ligament.
Okay.
Okay, the uterosacral, just the name. Okay, you need to just remember the name. Uterus to sacra is uterosacral. Pubic symphysis to cervix, it's called as pubocervical ligament. All right. The next one is the vaginal part, okay, which is situated below the uterus. Okay, the vagina. Okay, so this is situated just below the vagina. It's a fibromuscular tube, okay, and it is directed upwards and backwards. Okay, it is directed upwards and backwards. Here you can see it is directed upwards and backwards. Okay, it is pointing towards the backward direction. So it is directed upwards and backwards. Okay, approximately at an angle of 45 degree, and it runs between the bladder and the rectum and anal canal. Okay, so here you can see the vagina, the anterior part. Okay, so it is the uterus. The posterior part of the vagina is the rectum and anal canal. Okay, the upper part is by rectum and the lower part is by the anal canal. Okay, the anterior wall of the vagina, okay, and the posterior wall of the vagina, okay, which is longer. The posterior wall of the vagina is longer than the anterior wall. Okay, now why is that or how is that? Okay, so here you can see this is the sagittal section. So it shows the vaginal part. Okay, and this portion, this is the anterior wall of the vagina, and this is the posterior wall of the vagina. Okay, and you can see that the posterior wall of the vagina is slightly more, okay, than the anterior wall of the vagina. Okay, so the posterior wall of the vagina is slightly more than the anterior wall. Okay, so these are the approximate centimeters. Okay, so the anterior wall is 7.5, whereas the posterior one is 9. There are no secretory glands in the vagina. Okay, there are no secretory glands in the vagina, but they are kept moist. How it is kept moist? By the secretions from the cervix. Okay, you know fundus, body, and cervix, right? So from the cervix, there will be continuous secretions. Okay, so these secretions keep the vagina moist. Okay, so there are no secretory glands, but it is kept moist because of the cervical secretions. The blood supply, it is by both the uterine and the vaginal arteries. Both are branches from the internal iliac vessels. Okay. Any doubts? Okay, so the vagina is a fibromuscular tube. It is angled backwards and upwards, approximately at an angle of 45 degrees. It is situated between the bladder, the rectum, and the anal canal. Okay, so the posterior wall is slightly longer than the anterior wall. Okay, there are no secretions. Okay, there are no secretions in the vagina, and the secretions which are found, okay, in the vagina are coming from the cervix, the cervical part of the uterus. The blood supply, it is by the uterine and vaginal blood vessels. Lastly, the external genitalia. Okay, the external genitalia. The external genitalia corresponds, see, because when the baby first develops, okay, the baby first develops, it is first difficult to distinguish whether the baby is a male baby or a female baby. Then later on, because of the hormones as well as because of the chromosomes, okay, so it gets differentiated into male and female. Okay, so most of the parts are quite normal or similar, okay, except for the reproductive structures. Okay, so in males there is scrotum, but in females instead of scrotum, the scrotum is modified into labia majora. Okay, it's called as labia majora. And inside this labia majora, there is a smaller fold which is called as labia minora. Okay, labia minora. Okay, the female, they also have penis-like structure, but it is not well developed like males. Okay, and this is called as clitoris. Okay, clitoris. Okay, and inside the vagina there can be a mucous membrane, okay, which partially occludes, and this is called as hymen. Okay, a layer of mucous membrane which partially occludes the vagina. So this is called as hymen. Okay, then lastly there are vestibular glands. Okay, vestibular glands are also called as Bartholin's glands. Okay, so these glands open near the opening of the vagina. Okay, so here you can see, so near the outermost opening. Okay, near the outermost opening of the vagina, there will be a bulbourethral gland. Okay, in this picture it's not shown, okay, but it will be present below it. Okay, near the place where the vagina opens. Okay, so there will be this Bartholin's glands. Okay, so that's the location of Bartholin's glands, or also called as vestibular glands. So the external genitalia is composed of labia majora and labia minora. There is a clitoris which resembles that of penis. There is a hymen and the vestibular glands, also called as Bartholin's glands. All right. Any doubts?
No, doctor.
Okay, so that's it regarding today's session.